When I was held in a small room at this airport and denied water, I never imagined I would be standing here today, she began. I could have left that experience feeling only anger and resentment. Instead, I chose to see it as an opportunity, a chance to address a problem that affects travelers everywhere. She looked toward Bradley, who stood straight and attentive. This center is not about punishing mistakes. It's about learning from them. It's about recognizing that we all have biases, and that awareness is the first step toward change. After the speeches, Thomas invited Amira and Rashid to cut the ribbon across the center's entrance. Cameras flashed as they did so, and applause filled the terminal. Travelers passing by stopped to watch, some taking photos with their phones, others asking what was happening. Inside, the center was simple but welcoming. One wall displayed statistics about travel discrimination. Another showed testimonials from travelers who had faced bias at airports around the world. A third held a large interactive screen where visitors could take a test to identify their own unconscious biases. "What do you think?" Rashid asked Amira quietly as they toured the space. "It's perfect," she replied. "Not too academic, not too simplistic. It feels honest." After the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Bradley approached them again. "There's something I'd like to show you if you have a moment." He led them to a small room off the main center where a group of people waited nervously. Amira recognized some of them as airport staff from the training sessions, but others were unfamiliar. "These are travelers who have volunteered to be part of our peer support program," Bradley explained. "People who have experienced discrimination at airports and are willing to share their stories to help us improve." A woman in her 60s stepped forward. "Mrs. Karim, I want to thank you. Last year I was detained for 3 hours because my medication raised questions at security. No one would listen to my explanations. No one offered me water or a place to rest despite my age and health conditions. I filed complaints that went nowhere. But after your story came out, the airport contacted me. They apologized. They asked for my input on how to do better." One by one, others shared similar experiences. A man with a disability who had been spoken to as if he were a child. A woman in traditional religious dress who was routinely pulled aside for random searches. An elderly couple who had been separated during questioning because one of them had a foreign passport. "We've created a feedback loop," Bradley explained. "These volunteers help us identify problems, then work with staff to find solutions. It's already making a difference." Amira felt tears welling in her eyes. This is exactly what we hoped for, real change, driven by real experiences. Later that afternoon, Amira and Rashid sat in the first-class lounge waiting for their flight to Singapore. It was their first trip together in months, a chance to visit the clean water project that Amira had been working on when the incident occurred. "I got you something," Rashid said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple silver bracelet. Engraved on the inside were the words, "From every mistake, possibility." "It's beautiful," Amira said, letting him fasten it around her wrist. "A reminder of what you've accomplished," Rashid replied. "You turned what happened into something that will help thousands of people." "We did it together," she corrected him. Their flight was called and they gathered their things. At the gate, they were surprised to see Bradley Wilson checking boarding passes. "I requested regular rotation through different roles," he explained when they reached him. "It helps me understand the passenger experience from every angle." He checked their passes efficiently, then hesitated. "I never properly apologized to you, Mrs. Karim, Amira. Not just for that day, but for who I was then. I'm sorry." "Thank you, Bradley," Amira said sincerely. "But your actions have spoken louder than any apology could." As they boarded the plane, Rashid turned to Amira. "You know what still amazes me? Most people who go through what you did would have been satisfied with an apology and maybe some compensation. You saw a chance to create lasting change." Amira smiled. "I had a good teacher. You've always said that power is only meaningful when it's used to improve people's lives." In the year that followed, the program expanded beyond Heathrow. Airports in Dubai, Singapore, New York, and Sydney implemented similar training programs. The Karim Foundation provided funding and expertise, but insisted that each location adapt the approach to their specific cultural context. Bradley Wilson became a sought-after speaker, traveling to airports around the world to share his experience. From the man who had once denied Amira water out of prejudice, he had become an unlikely champion for dignity and respect in travel. On the anniversary of the incident, a documentary film was released, chronicling the events of that day and the changes that followed. It featured interviews with Amira and Rashid, but also with Bradley and many of the travelers and staff who had been affected by the program. The final scene showed Amira walking through Heathrow in her usual simple clothes, worn jeans, a comfortable sweater, her hair in a messy bun. This time, however, she passed through security and customs without incident. Staff members smiled and treated her with the same courtesy they extended to every traveler. As she reached the main terminal, the camera pulled back to reveal that it wasn't just Amira receiving this treatment. Everyone, from business travelers in expensive suits to families with young children, elderly passengers with mobility issues to students with backpacks, was being treated with the same respect and dignity. In the documentary's final interview, Amira sat in her foundation office, the bracelet from Rashid visible on her wrist. "People often ask if I'm still angry about what happened that day," she said thoughtfully. "The truth is I'm grateful, not for the humiliation or the discrimination, those things should never happen to anyone, but I'm grateful for the opportunity it created to address a problem that affects so many travelers." She looked directly into the camera, her expression earnest. The woman who was expelled from that airport line wasn't just me. She represented everyone who has ever been judged, based on appearance rather than character. The difference was that I had the resources and platform to do something about it, and that's a privilege I couldn't waste. The documentary ended with a simple statistic. In the year since the Karim Center opened, reported incidents of discriminatory treatment at participating airports had decreased by 67%. Below the statistic was a quote from Bradley Wilson. "We didn't just change policies, we changed perspectives." The simple woman who had been expelled from an airport line had indeed changed perspectives, starting with one customs officer and expanding outward to transform an entire industry. It wasn't the future she had imagined for herself, but it was one she had embraced with the same quiet determination that characterized everything she did. And each time she passed through an airport and saw someone being treated with dignity, regardless of how they looked or what they wore, she touched the bracelet on her wrist and smiled. From a moment of humiliation had come lasting change, proof that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is not anger, but vision. The detention room felt smaller with each passing minute. Amira glanced at her watch. She'd been held for nearly 2 hours now. Her mouth was dry, and the headache that had started as a dull throb behind her eyes was now pounding in full force. Still, she kept her composure, answering the repetitive questions with patience that was wearing increasingly thin. "So you maintain that you're married to Rashid Karim?" Officer Chen said, flipping through her notes. "Yet you have no photos of him on your phone, and you travel economy class." "I sent my luggage ahead with my assistant," Amira explained for the third time. "And I often fly commercial when I'm traveling for my foundation work. As for photos, my phone battery died during the flight." The male officer, who had introduced himself as Officer Park, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. "You understand how this sounds, right? One of the richest men in the world and his wife flies economy and gets stopped by customs. Bit far-fetched." Amira rubbed her temples. "Officer Park, I understand you're doing your job, but I've answered these questions repeatedly. My documentation is valid. If you would just allow me to make one phone call, we could clear this up immediately." "We'll get to that," Chen said dismissively. "First, let's go through your belongings again." Amira watched as they emptied her backpack for the second time. Her spare clothes, carefully folded, were shaken out and tossed aside. Her laptop was opened and examined. The novel she'd been reading, a gift from Rashid with a personal inscription, was flipped through, the officers seemingly looking for hidden compartments or secret messages. "What's this?" Officer Park held up a small velvet pouch. "My wedding ring," Amira replied. "I don't wear it when I'm in the field. Some of the areas I work in are very poor, and expensive jewelry can create barriers with the local communities. Park opened the pouch and whistled as a platinum band set with a modest but flawless diamond slid into his palm. Nice rock. Doesn't look like billionaire jewelry, though. I chose it, Amira said quietly. Rashid offered something larger, but I wanted something practical that wouldn't interfere with my work. Chen snorted. Right. Your humanitarian work with the billionaire husband. How about we move on to discussing the real reason you're trying to enter the country with a fraudulent priority pass? Outside the detention room, the atmosphere in the airport was shifting. 3 black Range Rovers pulled up to the VIP entrance, and a group of men and women in impeccable suits emerged. At their center walked Rashid Karim, his face set in grim determination. Unlike the carefully crafted public image of the smiling tech innovator, this was Rashid in crisis mode, focused, intense, and radiating barely controlled anger. The airport's general manager, Thomas Green, rushed to meet them, his face pale. Diana, Rashid's head of security, had made some calls, and now the entire airport administration was scrambling. Mr. Karim, sir, this is highly irregular. Where is my wife? Rashid cut him off, his voice low but carrying an authority that made everyone in the vicinity stop and stare. There seems to have been a misunderstanding, Thomas stammered. If you'll come to my office, we can... I didn't fly back early from Tokyo and cancel a meeting with the Prime Minister to sit in your office, Rashid said. My wife has been detained for over 2 hours. She's been denied water and the right to make a phone call. Take me to her, now. People throughout the terminal were beginning to notice the commotion. Smartphones appeared in hands as travelers recognized the famous tech billionaire, whose face had graced countless magazine covers. Security personnel moved to create a buffer between the growing crowd and Rashid's group. Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. Of course, Mr. Karim. This way, please. As they walked, Rashid's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Grace, spoke quietly. We have grounds for serious complaint here. Denial of basic needs, potential racial profiling, failure to follow proper detention protocols. Rashid nodded, but remained focused on what lay ahead. Let's get Amira first. Then we'll deal with the rest. In the detention room, the atmosphere had grown tenser. Amira sat with her hands folded in her lap, a picture of calm despite her exhaustion. Officers, I've cooperated fully. I've answered all your questions. I've allowed you to search my belongings. Twice. I've been polite despite being denied water and a phone call. I'm asking you again, please allow me to contact my husband. Officer Chen sighed dramatically. Look, we can keep this up all day. Why don't you just admit that the priority card isn't yours? We'll write you up for attempted fraud, you'll pay a fine, and you can be on your way. Continuing this charade is just wasting everyone's time. Before Amira could respond, the door swung open. Thomas Green entered, his face flushed. Officers, there's been a development. Chen frowned. Sir, we're in the middle of questioning. The questioning is over, came a new voice from the doorway. Rashid. Karim stepped into the room, his eyes immediately finding Amira's. For a moment, the controlled facade cracked, and relief washed across his face. Then his gaze hardened as he took in her obviously tired state, and the disarray of her belongings scattered across the table. Officer Chen's mouth fell open. Officer Park straightened up from his slouched position against the wall. Rashid, Amira said softly, a smile lighting her exhausted face. You didn't have to come all this way. Of course I did, he replied, crossing to her side and taking her hand. Are you all right? Just tired and thirsty, she said. Nothing serious. Rashid turned to the officers, who were now staring in shock. My wife asked for water 2 hours ago. Why wasn't that basic courtesy extended to her? Neither officer seemed able to form words. Behind Rashid, Diana entered with a bottle of water which she handed to Amira. Thomas Green was stammering apologies while Grace, the lawyer, was making notes on her tablet, her expression grim. Sir, we had no idea. Officer Park began. That's the problem, isn't it? Rashid cut him off. You had no idea who my wife was, so you felt entitled to treat her with disrespect. Would you have denied water to someone in a designer suit? Would you have repeatedly questioned someone's identity if they fit your image of what a priority passenger should look like? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, but damning. Thomas Green stepped forward. Mr. Karim, Mrs. Karim, on behalf of the airport authority, I extend our deepest apologies for this incident. Rest assured, there will be a full investigation. Amira stood, gathering her scattered belongings with Rashid's help. Thank you, Mr. Green. I appreciate that. She turned to the officers. I understand you were doing your jobs. I hope this incident leads to some reflection on how assumptions can affect your interactions with travelers. The gracious response clearly wasn't what anyone expected. Officer Chen looked down, unable to meet Amira's eyes. Officer Park mumbled something that might have been an apology. As they left the detention room, Amira leaned slightly against Rashid, finally allowing her exhaustion to show. Quite the welcome home, she murmured. Are you sure you're all right? Rashid asked quietly. Nothing that a shower and sleep won't fix, she assured him. Though I admit, the look on their faces when you walked in was almost worth the wait. Slight smile they shared was private, a moment of connection amidst the chaos that was building around them. Because chaos was indeed building. Word had spread throughout the airport. Employees whispered to each other, pointing discreetly. Travelers openly stared and took photos. Security struggled to maintain a clear path for Rashid, Amira, and their entourage. At the customs desk where it had all begun, Bradley Wilson was being berated by his supervisor. When he spotted Amira walking past with Rashid Karim at her side, surrounded by lawyers and security, the blood drained from his face. He seemed to shrink behind his desk as understanding dawned. The simple woman he'd humiliated was the wife of one of the most powerful men in the world. In the main terminal, reporters were already gathering. The story was too juicy to ignore. Billionaire tech genius rushes to airport to rescue wife detained by customs. Cameras flashed as Rashid guided Amira toward the exit, his security team forming a protective barrier around them. Diana, Rashid spoke to his head of security. Get the car ready, and call ahead to the house. Amira needs rest. Diana nodded and moved ahead to coordinate. You know this is going to be a story, Amira said quietly. I'm sorry about that. I know how you value your privacy. Rashid shook his head. You have nothing to apologize for. If anything, I should apologize to you. No one should be treated that way, regardless of who they're married to. As they approached the exit, Thomas Green hurried alongside them. Mr. Karim, perhaps we could discuss how to handle this situation. The airport authority would prefer to resolve this matter privately. Rashid stopped walking and turned to the manager. The crowd around them fell silent, sensing something important was about to happen. Mr. Green, Rashid said, his voice calm but carrying. What happened today isn't a PR problem to be managed. It's a symptom of a deeper issue. My wife was profiled, detained, and denied basic courtesy because she didn't match someone's idea of what an important person looks like. That's not a private matter to be swept under the rug. Thomas swallowed hard. Of course, sir. We take these matters very seriously. Do you? Rashid asked. Because from where I'm standing, it seems the only reason anyone is taking this seriously is because of who I am, not because of what was done to my wife. The gathered crowd murmured in agreement. Several people were recording the exchange on their phones. We'll discuss next steps tomorrow, Grace, the lawyer, told Thomas. For now, our priority is getting Mrs. Karim home to rest. As they stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, Amira squeezed Rashid's hand. That was quite the speech back there. I meant every word, he said softly. Neither of them realized that their private moment was being photographed, or that by morning, the story would explode across social media and news outlets worldwide. The simple woman and her billionaire husband were about to become the catalysts for a much larger conversation about privilege, assumption, and how we treat each other when we think no one important is watching. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. A passenger with a good angle had captured the entire confrontation between Rashid Karim and the airport manager. The clip, barely 3 minutes long, had already been viewed millions of times. Airport discrimination and the Marn Simple woman were trending worldwide. Amira woke up in their penthouse after sleeping for nearly 12 hours. She stretched, feeling the lingering stiffness from the long flight and the tension of detention finally leaving her body. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of London. She found Rashid in his home office, still wearing the clothes from yesterday, surrounded by 3 laptops and multiple phones. Diana stood nearby, talking quietly into her headset. Grace, the lawyer, was gesturing at something on her tablet screen. "You didn't sleep," Amira said from the doorway. It wasn't a question. Rashid looked up, his face softening instantly. "How are you feeling?" "Much better." She crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. "But you look terrible." He laughed, rubbing his eyes. "Thanks for the honesty." "Always," she replied, glancing at the screens. One showed social media reactions, another displayed email chains with what looked like airport executives, and the third had a news channel silently playing footage of their exit from the airport. "It's everywhere, isn't it?" Diana nodded. It exploded overnight. Every major network has picked it up. The airport's stock dropped 7% when markets opened. They've issued 3 separate statements so far. "And Bradley Wilson?" Amira asked. "Suspended pending investigation," Grace answered, "along with the 2 officers who detained you. The airport authority is in damage control mode." Amira sank into the chair beside Rashid. "This wasn't what I wanted. Those people will probably lose their jobs." "They treated you horribly," Rashid reminded her. "Yes, they did," Amira agreed. "But firing a few employees won't solve the real problem." She turned to the screens showing the social media response. "Look at all these comments. So many people sharing similar stories." This clearly struck a nerve. Rashid studied his wife. Despite her exhaustion, her mind was already working, seeing patterns and possibilities. "You have that look," he said. "What look?" "The one you get when you're about to turn a problem into an opportunity." Amira smiled slightly. "Maybe." She turned to Diana. "Has the press been asking for statements?" "Constantly," Diana confirmed. "We've been declining all requests, as per standard protocol." "What if we didn't?" Amira suggested. "What if we used this moment to start a bigger conversation?" Rashid leaned forward, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" Before she could answer, one of the phones rang. Diana checked the screen. "It's the Prime Minister's office again." "Take a message," Rashid said, still looking at Amira. "We're in the middle of something important." Across town, the atmosphere at Heathrow Airport was tense. Bradley Wilson sat in a sterile conference room, facing the airport's HR director and head of security. His union representative sat beside him, looking grim. "The video has over 20 million views now," the HR director said. "Your face is clearly visible. People have identified you online." Bradley stared at his hands. "I was just doing my job." "Were you?" the security head asked sharply. "Because from the video evidence and witness statements, it looks like you singled out Mrs. Karim based on her appearance. That's not protocol, that's profiling." "How was I supposed to know who she was?" Bradley protested. "She didn't look like someone who should be in the priority lane." The union rep winced visibly. The HR director's eyebrows shot up. "And what exactly should someone in the priority lane look like, Mr. Wilson?" the HR director asked coldly. Bradley fell silent, realizing too late how his words sounded. "The airport authority has received over 50,000 emails since yesterday," the security head continued. "Our social media accounts are flooded with complaints. Corporate partners are threatening to pull their contracts. And Mr. Karim's lawyers have requested all security footage and documentation related to the incident." "Am I being fired?" Bradley asked quietly. "That decision hasn't been made yet," the HR director replied. "For now, you remain suspended with pay while the investigation continues." After they left, Bradley sat alone in the conference room. His phone buzzed continuously with notifications, messages from colleagues, news alerts about the incident, and increasingly, threats and abuse from strangers who had found his social media accounts. He switched it off and dropped his head into his hands. How had checking a passenger's documentation spiraled into this international incident? He'd been with the airport for 12 years. He'd never had a complaint filed against him before. Now his face was all over the internet, labeled as the man who had discriminated against a billionaire's wife. At the Kareem penthouse, a different sort of meeting was taking place. Amira had showered and changed, and despite Rashid's protests that she should rest more, had insisted on joining the crisis management discussion. The airport authority wants to settle this quickly and quietly, Grace explained. They're offering a formal apology, assurances that the employees involved will be appropriately disciplined, and a generous donation to your foundation. Amira shook her head. That's not good enough. What do you want then? Grace asked. We could demand more substantial compensation, though money is hardly an issue for you. This isn't about money, Amira replied. And it's not about punishing those specific employees either. What happened to me happens to people every day. People without famous husbands or legal teams. The only difference is that in my case, everyone is paying attention. She turned to Rashid. Remember what we discussed in Singapore last month? About creating a training program for organizations? Rashid nodded slowly, understanding dawning. The Dignity Initiative. Exactly. Amira stood up and began pacing, energy replacing her earlier fatigue. Instead of a quick settlement and a donation, what if we propose something more substantial? A complete overhaul of training for all airport staff, focused on recognizing and overcoming bias. Not just a one-time workshop, but ongoing education with real accountability. That's ambitious, Grace said. And expensive, Diana added. Yes to both, Rashid agreed, but also exactly the right response. He turned to his communications director, who had joined them via video call. Pablo, arrange a press conference for this afternoon, not at the airport, somewhere neutral. The foundation headquarters? Pablo suggested. Amira nodded. Perfect. While the team began making arrangements, Amira pulled Rashid aside. There's something else I want to discuss with you, about Bradley Wilson. Rashid's expression hardened. The man who started all this. Yes, I don't think he should be fired. What? Rashid looked at her in disbelief. Amira, he humiliated you, he denied you water, I know what he did, she said calmly. And I'm not excusing it. But firing him doesn't solve the problem, it just makes him more bitter and reinforces the idea that consequences only happen when powerful people get involved. So what are you suggesting? Something more constructive, something that might actually change his perspective. By early afternoon, news of the upcoming press conference had spread. Media crews set up outside the modest building that housed Amira's foundation. Despite its important work providing clean water infrastructure to communities around the world, the foundation maintained a low profile. Until today. Inside, Amira stood before a mirror, adjusting her hijab. She had chosen to wear it today, something she didn't always do in London. Her outfit was simple but elegant, a flowing blue tunic over tailored pants. Ready? Rashid asked, appearing in the doorway. Almost, she replied. How do I look? Beautiful, he said without hesitation. And formidable. She smiled. Good. That's the look I was going for. When they walked into the conference room, cameras flashed in rapid succession. Reporters who had been checking their phones looked up eagerly. The room fell silent as Amira and Rashid took their places at the table, flanked by their legal and communications teams. Pablo stepped up to the microphone first. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Mrs. Kareem will make a brief statement regarding yesterday's incident at Heathrow Airport, after which she and Mr. Kareem will take a few questions. He stepped aside, and Amira leaned toward the microphone. Camera shutters clicked frantically. Yesterday I experienced something that many travelers face every day, she began, her voice clear and steady. I was judged based on my appearance, detained without cause, and denied basic courtesy. The only difference between my experience and countless others is that my husband happens to be well known. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. This is not about me seeking special treatment. This is about recognizing a systemic problem and using this moment of attention to create meaningful change. Amira outlined their proposal, a comprehensive training program for all airport staff, focused on recognizing unconscious bias and treating all travelers with dignity. We've presented this proposal to the airport authority, she continued. Rather than seeking financial compensation or demanding punitive measures against specific employees, we're asking for a commitment to substantive, lasting change. A reporter raised her hand. Mrs. Karim, are you saying you don't want the employees who mistreated you to face consequences? Accountability is important, Amira acknowledged. But so is redemption. I've requested that instead of termination, the employees involved should be the first to participate in the new training program and then help implement it with their colleagues. True change comes when people learn and grow from their mistakes, not when they're simply punished for them. Another reporter stood. Mr. Karim, your company holds significant shares in the airline alliance that operates from Heathrow. Are you planning to use that leverage to force the airport to comply with your demands? Rashid leaned forward. We're not making demands, we're offering a solution. One that benefits everyone, travelers, airport staff, and the aviation industry as a whole. But yes, we're prepared to use every resource at our disposal to ensure this initiative moves forward. This isn't about revenge, it's about progress. The questions continued across town in his small apartment. Bradley Wilson watched the press conference on his laptop, stunned by what he was hearing. The woman he had humiliated was now advocating for him to keep his job. Not only that, but she wanted him to help implement the very training program inspired by his actions. His phone rang. It was his union representative. Are you watching this? The rep asked. Yes, Bradley replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The airport authority has already agreed to their proposal. They'll announce it officially tomorrow. You're being offered a choice, participate in this program or resign. Bradley looked back at his screen where Amira was speaking with quiet authority about dignity and second chances. I'll participate, he said. Little did he know that his decision would change not only his career, but his entire worldview, and that the simple woman he had dismissed would become one of the most influential voices in a global conversation about how we see and treat each other. 6 weeks after the incident, Bradley Wilson stood nervously outside a conference room at the airport training center. His reflection in the glass door showed a man who looked different somehow, the same face but with softer edges. The arrogant tilt of his chin was gone, replaced by a thoughtful, slightly uncertain expression. He adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. Inside the room, 20 airport staff members waited for him. They were the first group to participate in the new training program that had been developed with remarkable speed. And somehow, in a turn of events he still couldn't quite believe, he was helping to lead it. Ready? Asked a gentle voice behind him. Bradley turned to see Amira, dressed in a simple blue suit, her curly hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite having met her several times during the preparation for this day, he still felt a wave of shame whenever he saw her. I'm not sure, he admitted. What if they hate me? Everyone's seen the video. They know what I did. That's exactly why. You're the right person to do this, Amira said. You're not speaking from theory but from experience. That's powerful. Inside the room, conversations hushed as they entered. Bradley felt the weight of eyes on him. Curious, judgmental, uncertain. He recognized that look. He'd given it to countless travelers himself. Amira stepped forward first. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being part of this first training cohort. I'm Amira Karim, and this is Bradley Wilson. We're going to share a story with you today. A story that began with assumptions and ended with an opportunity for change. Over the next 3 hours, they talked about what had happened that day. Bradley spoke with raw honesty about his thought process, about the snap judgments he'd made based on Amira's appearance. I saw her worn jeans and simple sweater, and I decided she didn't belong in the priority lane, he explained, his voice occasionally catching. I never asked myself why I thought that. I never questioned my own assumptions. I just acted on them, and in doing so, I caused harm. Across town, in the gleaming headquarters of Kareem Technologies, Rashid was holding a different kind of meeting. The company's board members sat around a massive table, their expressions ranging from supportive to skeptical. The Airport Dignity Initiative will require significant investment, Rashid explained, advancing to the next slide in his presentation. But the potential impact goes far beyond one airport or one incident. An older board member leaned forward. Rashid, no one questions that what happened to Amira was awful. But is this really the best use of company resources? Our shareholders expect us to focus on core business. Rashid's expression remained calm, but those who knew him well could see the intensity in his eyes. Peter, when I started this company, I promised that we would use our success to make the world better, not just more technologically advanced. This initiative aligns perfectly with that mission. Another board member, a woman who had supported Rashid through several controversial decisions in the past, nodded. I agree. Besides, the public response has been overwhelmingly positive. Our stock is up 12% since the announcement. Sometimes doing the right thing is also good business. It's more than that, Rashid said quietly. When Amira called me from that detention room, he paused, the memory still painful. I've built a company worth billions. I've changed how the world stores energy. But in that moment, I couldn't immediately protect someone I love from being mistreated. That changes you. It makes you see your power and your limitations differently. The room fell silent. Even the skeptics seemed touched by the rare personal admission from their usually reserved CEO. The vote doesn't need to be unanimous, Rashid continued after a moment. But I want to be clear, this is happening. The question is whether it happens with the full support of this board, or despite its reservations. Back at the airport training center, the session was wrapping up. The initial wariness from the staff had given way to engaged discussion. Bradley had watched in amazement as Amira skillfully guided conversations about bias, dignity, and the small moments of power that occur in every interaction between airport staff and travelers. Before we end today, I'd like to share something, Bradley said, finding courage he didn't know he had. When I was suspended, I was angry. I felt like a scapegoat. I kept thinking, how was I supposed to know who she was? He looked at Amira, who nodded encouragingly. But that's exactly the problem, isn't it? The idea that some people deserve respect and others don't. That treating someone with dignity depends on who they are, what they're wearing, or how important they seem. A security officer raised her hand. I get that, but we also have to be vigilant. Some profiling is necessary for safety. There's a difference between security protocols and assumptions based on appearance, Amira replied. One is about specific behaviors and risk factors. The other is about lazy thinking. And I was thinking lazily that day, Bradley admitted. The truth is, even if Amira hadn't been married to Rashid Kareem, what I did was wrong. Every traveler deserves water when they ask for it. Every traveler deserves to have their valid documentation taken seriously. Every traveler deserves to be seen as a person, not a stereotype. As the training session ended, staff members approached Bradley and Amira with questions and comments. Many seemed genuinely affected by the discussion. A few even admitted to similar mistakes they'd made in the past. One older customs officer waited until the others had left before approaching Bradley. I've been doing this job for 27 years, she said quietly, and I've made the same judgments you did, more times than I can count. I just never got caught on video. Thanks for having the guts to stand up and own it. Bradley felt a weight lift from his shoulders, not completely, but enough to stand a little straighter. That evening, a small dinner was held at the Kareem penthouse to celebrate the successful launch of the training program. Airport executives mingled with foundation staff and members of the legal and communications teams who had worked tirelessly to turn Amira's vision into reality. Bradley arrived late, still uncomfortable in such rarefied surroundings. Rashid himself opened the door. Mr. Kareem, Bradley said stiffly, extending his hand. Thank you for including me. Rashid, please, he replied. shaking Bradley's hand firmly. "And thank you for your commitment to this program. I know it can't be easy." Inside, Bradley found himself gravitating toward the corner of the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water and observing the easy confidence with which the other guests navigated the space. He felt out of place, a working-class guy from a modest background suddenly thrust into a world of wealth and influence. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" came a voice beside him. He turned to find Diana, Rashid's head of security, studying him with knowing eyes. "A bit," he admitted. "I felt the same way when I first started working for Rashid," she said. "I grew up in a council flat in Manchester. First time I came to a dinner like this, I used the wrong fork and spilled wine on a cabinet minister." Despite his nervousness, Bradley laughed. "What happened?" "Amira helped me clean it up. Never said a word about it to anyone else." Diana's expression softened. "That's when I knew what kind of people they really were. Not the kind who judge you for using the wrong fork." Across the room, Amira was deep in conversation with the airport's newly appointed Director of Customer Experience, a position created specifically to oversee the implementation of the Dignity Initiative. "The feedback from today's session was incredible," the director said. "We've already had staff from other departments asking to be included in the next cohort." "That's wonderful," Amira replied. "But remember, this is just the beginning. Real change takes time and consistent effort. And resources," the director added. "The board has approved funding for the first year, but beyond that, won't be a problem," Rashid interjected, joining the conversation. "We're establishing an endowment to ensure the program continues regardless of budget fluctuations. This isn't a one-time PR exercise. It's a long-term commitment." Later, as guests began to leave, Bradley found himself alone with Amira on the penthouse balcony. The London skyline sparkled below them, a carpet of lights stretching to the horizon. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for today, but for everything. You could have ruined my life. Instead, you've given me purpose." Amira looked at him thoughtfully. "Everyone deserves the chance to grow from their mistakes. Even airport customs officers who jump to conclusions." Bradley smiled slightly. "I've been meaning to ask, why did you send your luggage ahead that day? And why were you in the priority lane but not flying first class? It still doesn't make sense to me." "Does it matter?" Amira asked gently. Bradley considered this. "I guess not. That's the point, isn't it? I shouldn't have needed a reason to treat you with respect." "Exactly." Amira leaned against the balcony railing. "But if you're curious, I send my luggage ahead because I often bring back materials from the field that need special handling. I fly economy on foundation trips because I want our donors' money going to projects, not luxury travel. And I use the priority lane because time is the one resource we can't make more of, and Rashid insists I not waste it standing in lines when there's an alternative." Bradley nodded slowly, understanding more clearly how his assumptions had been not just unkind but deeply uninformed. "I never would have known any of that. Which is why we should be careful about the stories we tell ourselves about strangers," Amira replied. "We see such a small piece of who they are." As Bradley left the penthouse that night, he felt changed in ways he couldn't fully articulate. The anger and defensiveness that had consumed him after the incident had given way to something else. A sense of responsibility, yes, but also possibility. The simple woman he had dismissed had turned out to be extraordinary not because of her marriage or wealth, but because of her capacity for forgiveness and her vision for change. And somehow, improbably, she had drawn him into that vision, offering him not just a second chance but a new purpose. The next morning, as he prepared for another training session, Bradley looked at himself in the mirror and saw something new, reflected back, a man in the process of becoming better than he had been. It wasn't a comfortable journey, but it was a necessary one. And it had all started with a moment of careless judgment, a viral video, and a woman who had chosen to transform humiliation into hope. 3 months had passed since the incident. On a crisp autumn morning, Amira stood at the entrance of Heathrow Airport, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The last time she had walked through these doors, she'd been exhausted and alone, unaware of how much her life was about to change. Today she arrived surrounded by cameras and airport officials with Rashid by her side. Nervous? Rashid asked quietly, noticing how she gripped his hand. A little, she admitted. It feels like coming full circle. They were there for the official opening of the Karim Center for Equality in Travel, a dedicated space within the airport where staff training would take place and where travelers could report concerns about their treatment. What had begun as a response to one incident had evolved into something much larger, a model program that airports around the world were now looking to replicate. Inside the terminal, a small crowd had gathered for the ceremony. Airport executives stood alongside staff members who had completed the training program. Journalists positioned their cameras. And at the back of the group, slightly apart from the others, stood Bradley Wilson. In the month since the training program began, Bradley had undergone a remarkable transformation. From reluctant participant to passionate advocate, he had shared his story with hundreds of airport employees. His honest account of his own biases and their consequences had proven more powerful than any theoretical training could be. As Amira and Rashid approached, Bradley stepped forward to greet them. Gone was the defensive, angry man who had first entered the training program. In his place stood someone who had found purpose in acknowledging his mistakes and helping others learn from them. Mrs. Karim, Mr. Karim, he said formally, shaking their hands. Everything is ready for the ceremony. Thank you, Bradley, Amira replied warmly. And please, after all this time, it's just Amira. The airport's general manager, Thomas Green, approached the small podium that had been set up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. 3 months ago, an unfortunate incident at this airport sparked a conversation about dignity, respect, and the unconscious biases that affect how we treat each other. Today, we're proud to formalize our commitment to doing better. He gestured toward a door that had been covered with a blue cloth. The Karim Center for Equality in Travel represents not just our response to one incident, but our ongoing commitment to ensuring that every traveler who passes through these doors is treated with the same respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or status. Amira stepped up to the podium next. Looking out at the gathered crowd, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that day in detention. When I was held in a small room at this airport and denied water, I never imagined I would be standing here today, she began. I could have left that experience feeling only anger and resentment. Instead, I chose to see it as an opportunity, a chance to address a problem that affects travelers everywhere. She looked toward Bradley, who stood straight and attentive. This center is not about punishing mistakes. It's about learning from them. It's about recognizing that we all have biases, and that awareness is the first step toward change. After the speeches, Thomas invited Amira and Rashid to cut the ribbon across the center's entrance. Cameras flashed as they did so, and applause filled the terminal. Travelers passing by stopped to watch, some taking photos with their phones, others asking what was happening. Inside, the center was simple but welcoming. One wall displayed statistics about travel discrimination. Another showed testimonials from travelers who had faced bias at airports around the world. A third held a large interactive screen where visitors could take a test to identify their own unconscious biases. What do you think? Rashid asked Amira quietly as they toured the space. It's perfect, she replied. Not too academic, not too simplistic. It feels honest. After the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Bradley approached them again. There's something I'd like to show you if you have a moment. He led them to a small room off the main center where a group of people waited nervously. Amira recognized some of them as airport staff from the training sessions, but others were unfamiliar. These are travelers who have volunteered to be part of our peer support program, Bradley explained. People who have experienced discrimination at airports and are willing to share their stories to help us improve. A woman in her 60s stepped forward. Mrs. Karim, I want to thank you. Last year I was detained for 3 hours because my medication raised questions at security. No one would listen to my explanations. No one offered me water or a place to rest despite my age and health conditions. I filed complaints that went nowhere. But after your story came out, the airport contacted me. They apologized. They asked, for my input on how to do better. One by one, others shared similar experiences. A man with a disability who had been spoken to as if he were a child. A woman in traditional religious dress who was routinely pulled aside for random searches. An elderly couple who had been separated during questioning because one of them had a foreign passport. "We've created a feedback loop," Bradley explained. "These volunteers help us identify problems, then work with staff to find solutions. It's already making a difference." Amira felt tears welling in her eyes. This is exactly what we hoped for, real change, driven by real experiences. Later that afternoon, Amira and Rashid sat in the first-class lounge waiting for their flight to Singapore. It was their first trip together in months, a chance to visit the clean water project that Amira had been working on when the incident occurred. "I got you something," Rashid said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple silver bracelet. Engraved on the inside were the words, "From every mistake, possibility." "It's beautiful," Amira said, letting him fasten it around her wrist. "A reminder of what you've accomplished," Rashid replied. "You turned what happened into something that will help thousands of people." "We did it together," she corrected him. Their flight was called and they gathered their things. At the gate, they were surprised to see Bradley Wilson checking boarding passes. "I requested regular rotation through different roles," he explained when they reached him. "It helps me understand the passenger experience from every angle." He checked their passes efficiently, then hesitated. "I never properly apologized to you, Mrs. Karim, Amira. Not just for that day, but for who I was then. I'm sorry." "Thank you, Bradley," Amira said sincerely. "But your actions have spoken louder than any apology could." As they boarded the plane, Rashid turned to Amira. "You know what still amazes me? Most people who go through what you did would have been satisfied with an apology and maybe some compensation. You saw a chance to create lasting change." Amira smiled. "I had a good teacher. You've always said that power is only meaningful when it's used to improve people's lives." In the year that followed, the program expanded beyond Heathrow. Airports in Dubai, Singapore, New York, and Sydney implemented similar training programs. The Karim Foundation provided funding and expertise, but insisted that each location adapt the approach to their specific cultural context. Bradley Wilson became a sought-after speaker, traveling to airports around the world to share his experience. From the man who had once denied Amira water out of prejudice, he had become an unlikely champion for dignity and respect in travel. On the anniversary of the incident, a documentary film was released, chronicling the events of that day and the changes that followed. It featured interviews with Amira and Rashid, but also with Bradley and many of the travelers and staff who had been affected by the program. The final scene showed Amira walking through Heathrow in her usual simple clothes, worn jeans, a comfortable sweater, her hair in a messy bun. This time, however, she passed through security and customs without incident. Staff members smiled and treated her with the same courtesy they extended to every traveler. As she reached the main terminal, the camera pulled back to reveal that it wasn't just Amira receiving this treatment. Everyone, from business travelers in expensive suits to families with young children, elderly passengers with mobility issues to students with backpacks, was being treated with the same respect and dignity. In the documentary's final interview, Amira sat in her foundation office, the bracelet from Rashid visible on her wrist. "People often ask if I'm still angry about what happened that day," she said thoughtfully. "The truth is I'm grateful, not for the humiliation or the discrimination. Those things should never happen to anyone. But I'm grateful for the opportunity it created to address a problem that affects so many travelers." She looked directly into the camera, her expression earnest. "The woman who was expelled from that airport line wasn't just me. She represented everyone who has ever been judged, based on appearance rather than character. The difference was that I had the resources and platform to do something about it, and that's a privilege I couldn't waste." The documentary ended with a simple statistic. In the year since the Karim Center opened, reported incidents of discriminatory treatment at participating airports had decreased by 67%. Below the statistic was a quote from Bradley Wilson. "We didn't just change policies, we changed perspectives." The simple woman who had been expelled from an airport line had indeed changed perspectives, starting with one customs officer and expanding outward to transform an entire industry. It wasn't the future she had imagined for herself, but it was one she had embraced with the same quiet determination that characterized everything she did. And each time she passed through an airport and saw someone being treated with dignity, regardless of how they looked or what they wore, she touched the bracelet on her wrist and smiled. From a moment of humiliation had come lasting change, proof that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is not anger, but vision.